Hey everybody, this is your daily dose of all things royal. Happy Halloween, my gorgeous good looking friends. Today's video is going to be a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Really just my thoughts over the last couple days on what I've been seeing and kind of putting some things together that I just want to share with all of you. There has been a lot of chatter since Lady C's last video discussing Archie's marvelous talent while he was in the womb. I mean, he must be really special to be able to contort himself to disappear while his mother sits down and then show up and pop himself out when she is on full display. I mean, we're talking super Hollywood talent on this one. I mean, you know that we're dealing with some super intelligence. This little fetus was floating around in this embryonic fluid trying to get out. You see him slipping and sliding from left to right, then almost down to her knees. And I totally understand why Meghan was holding her fetus the entire time. I mean, Archie was not ready to make his debut yet. Like, they had to get Gayle King together, they had to sign the contracts. I mean, there's no way that he was going to be able to come out prematurely onto the floor. But this little guy seriously wanted to take the spotlight because whenever he had the chance, he expanded himself out for the whole world to see. I mean, could we expect anything less from an offspring of the Meghan Markle? I mean, she does have the seed of the dimwit prince. I'm surprised she didn't show the photos of the three wise men showing up to Windsor Castle to give their blessing on this newborn king. You would think that Lord Farton Dumbarton, that came from the Virgin Meghan, was so special that you would think that the media would be covering this miraculous birth, as it is in the public interest, since Lord Farton Dumbarton is seventh at the time in line to the throne. It is strange that the media in the UK doesn't talk about the inconsistencies of Archie's arrival. So now in October 2022, there had been whispers going around of people thinking that there may be a super injunction imposed on the media concerning this miraculous birth. To be honest, that's the first time I ever heard of the term super injunction because we don't have that here in the United States. I didn't fully understand it, but from what I gather, it is a gagging order against the media to talk about specific topics. And then the super part of it is the extra layer in which nobody knows if there's one imposed, or at least that's what I understood it before actually doing some research on it. Now, in light of Lady C's updated note around potentially news coming out by next spring, and wondering if the timeline around this is tied to a potential super injunction that is about to expire. So, the first thing that I did is wanted to take a step back to understand what exactly is a super injunction and how do you go about getting one? And what better way to start is with the UK judicial system. So, folks, there's an actual committee that's set up that goes through the process in granting super injunctions. They're not as common as many people think, and they had put this committee in place so that wealthy elites did not abuse it or take advantage of it. So this document really serves as the structure for how super injunctions are decided, the reasoning behind it, and the parameters or framework that they use in order to implement this kind of gagging order on the media. And what it boils down to is that this committee tries to find a balance between not restricting freedom of expression and speech and violating a person's privacy rights in accordance with the Human Rights Act of 1998. Defined by this report, a super injunction is a form of an interim injunction, temporary injunction imposed prior to the issue or during the course of proceedings pending trial and final judgment. Both the principles governing the grant of injunctions, whether final or interim, and the application of those principles are well established. They are also, generally speaking, uncontroversial. Now, if we go off of this definition, the way that I understand it is that there has to be some kind of court case in process, whether it be in the form of proceedings, whether it be pending a trial, or in final judgment. It does not appear that just because you have money or belong to the royal family, you could go to the courts and say, hey, I want a super injunction gagging all of UK media because I don't want them talking about my miraculous birth and jeopardizing my child's place in the line of succession, hypothetically. The committee then goes into defining super injunction succinctly here as an interim injunction which restrains a person from publishing information which concerns the applicant and is said to be confidential or private, and publicizing or informing others of the existence of the order and the proceedings, the super element of the order. Now, the way that I understand how this works is that in order to kick off this super injunction, a letter has to be given to the third parties, which would be all the media outlets that need to be held under this gagging order. So, in the case of, let's say, a certain royal couple ended up issuing one, they would give one to each and every one of those news outlets in the UK that they don't want talking about them. And I've read that the letter normally goes to the editor and they don't disclose it to the journalists. They're the ones that either say, no, you can't talk about this, and leaves it at that. They don't say why, or they don't indicate that there is such a gagging order that's in place, but people can assume it's just they're the ones that hold that information. Quite frankly, seeing how dirty and underhanded the media is in the UK, I find it very hard to believe that they would be able to uphold this principle, considering there's a lot worse that they have done in leaking information. So, this is supposed to be the law, and it does look like this is one rule that is respected to some degree, because there is a consequence, as it says in the last line here, the imposition of a fine or sequestration of property if you don't comply with the court. I'll be honest, it's not looking too good for the UK court system, considering they allowed Meghan Markle to lie and nothing happened to her. This year, Harry's witness testimony, need I say more? That in itself was a joke. Then you also now have Graham Johnson, who is star witness, allegedly forging other people's witness statements. The whole thing with Harry's case is such a circus. You have to wonder what is going on behind the scenes, because in my eyes, it should have been thrown out immediately. So some of the special features of this super injunction is, first, the super injunction will not only be served on the respondents to the injunction application, where their identity is known, but will also be served on third parties, persons who are not parties to the proceedings. So anything in the external orbit, I would think. Those third parties are usually media organizations, which will usually not have had prior notice of the proceedings. So they could be issued something, but don't know that there is a case that's going on. So now this part is important. It says, in many cases where the identity of the respondent to the application is unknown, the real value of the order is the ability to serve it on media third parties, as it prohibits them from disclosing the information subject to the injunction pending the conclusion of the proceedings. It thus stops the media from publishing stories concerning the protected information pending trial. The feature which transforms an interim injunction into a super injunction, the super element, is, however, none of the above three features, important though they are. The super element is a prohibition on the disclosure or communication of the existence of the order and the proceedings. It is this feature of the injunction which initially brought public attention to super injunctions in the Trafigura proceedings. The term super injunction was coined by The Guardian in relation to the provision in the injunction granted in those proceedings, which prohibited reporting the existence of the proceedings. Now, as far as the timeframes that are set that cover these super injunctions, that's for the court to decide. Normally, they are a couple of years to cover the length of or the duration that they think that this case will be. Now, I'm just speculating. I don't have any kind of insider information, but knowing what we just read about super injunctions, there has to be some type of legal action in process. And we do know how litigious this couple is. So Is it possible that all these court cases attacking the media and talking about privacy could be in relation to satisfying potentially a super injunction? And if you notice, all these court cases involve media outlets. So, do I think that it's possible they issued out since 2019 after this miraculous birth happened? Yeah, I do. To stop people from talking about it. Right off the bat, people started to question the inconsistencies between the time going into labor, then the announcement of the miraculous birth, and the couple being back at Windsor Castle after being in the hospital for 2 hours. There was just too much madness going on that just didn't make sense. And on top of it, the tweet by Kensington Palace that was allegedly sent out in error of how this miraculous birth happened. Now, I speculate they were being backed into a corner because after this miraculous birth, there was all sorts of things that just didn't add up, such as the christening and how big the baby was and the awkwardness of holding this child. And perhaps if we are to take Harry's word for it that he met David Sherborne down in France with Elton John, then maybe this is where the conversation came up about tagging onto this grift of swindling the Murdoch empire. Now, if I were to guess, I believe that they got started on the application for this super injunction, and then Meghan and Harry filed their lawsuits, Harry at the very end of September, and then Meghan at the beginning of October. So now they have these legal proceedings in play, and I'm sure that they gave them maybe 2 to 3 years in order to be protected and covered if, let's say, there is a super injunction in place. Let's say if they were covered for a 2-year, then that would have meant that in 2021 there would have been an expiration on it. At least for Meghan's case, that was put to rest. Now you had left was Harry's case, which was this one lawsuit that could go south in the following year and be dismissed. So what happens the following year in January of 2022? Harry goes ahead and files more lawsuits, one against the newspaper and then against the government. In all of these lawsuits, they cite privacy and the Human Rights Act of 1998. So is that a coincidence? I mean, it is a factor that they would take into consideration if they were to grant a super injunction. And if, let's say, there was an extension added on to the court case for another 2 years, then that would bring you into 2024, which my guess, this is where it lands us to being freed if there is a super injunction in place. That's just my guess. So the logical question that we have here is what happens when all of this is done? Let's say there is a super injunction that's in place. Well, a couple of things can happen, right? So it says, by contrast, a final injunction, one made at trial following the final determination of the party's substantive rights, only binds those against whom it is made. Once proceedings are concluded, or in the meantime, if it has lapsed by the expiry of a time limit or is set aside, like any other interim injunction, a super injunction ceases to have any effect and therefore no longer binds any third party who has notice of it. Hence, it is of particular importance that the third party is informed as soon as it is no longer in force, as the administration of justice following a trial has taken place. Now, let's say there is a super injunction in place, hypothetically. If Harry loses, all bets are off pertaining to whoever he had issued out super injunctions to. Now, going back on the theory, if there is a super injunction in place, and let's say Harry does win at least one of them, then there is a possibility where the super injunction becomes a final injunction, which can be determined to be indefinite. Even though this is a rare occurrence, keep in mind we're dealing with 2 whiny victims who are going to cry and scream at the top of their lungs that they're at risk of their privacy and they're going to abuse Article 6 and 8 of their rights, in which I'm sure a judge will continue to grant it because of who Harry is. He's the king's son, and that's the king's court, which I find completely effed up. But if this were to play out and this was the scenario, from what I understand from this document, this could very well happen. Now, hypothetically, if you put this all into perspective, how many times have we questioned the madness that we see on what these two do? None of it ever makes sense, especially these frivolous lawsuits. But if there is a level that we're not seeing, which could be this super injunction, then maybe this could be the method to their madness. And I don't think that Harry and Meghan thought their lives were going to pan out this way. I really do think that Meghan had this plan and said, don't worry, let's just get this coverage now and we'll deal with it when we get over to the United States. By that time, we're going to be billionaires and we're not going to care about whether or not our children are in the line of succession. Well, it didn't turn out the way that they planned. And I think that they're holding on for dear life to keep this association. And on top of it, to protect this scandal. Because, in my opinion, I believe that this is the biggest con of the century. That's my opinion. I don't buy it for 1 second, and I'm entitled to feel that way. I also believe that a lot of what they do with the censorship industrial complex, particularly Harry, and involving himself to push policy and legislation with the organizations that are tied to suppressing people's freedom of speech, has a lot to do with keeping secret of this miraculous birth and other nefarious things that are going on, especially with that Archwell Public Charity. You see, it's interesting that these laws that are being pushed by people like this, it's all to help them continue to keep lying. They want to suppress the truth in order to continue on manipulating and deceiving people. Harry and Meghan are 100% a part of this censorship movement that we see happening. And I can't understand for the life of me why more people are not screaming at the top of their lungs about this man undermining our Constitution and our civil rights, let alone the domestic threat that these two are posing by home-growing a terror organization called the Sussex Squad. For me, Harry and Meghan represent the class that is driving this country into the toilet. They're stealing from the taxpayer and they're lining their own pockets. All these nonsense social justice non-for-profits that have popped up out of nowhere, like Archwell Public Charity, aren't doing a damn thing to make this better for us. Think about it. Has race relations gotten any better? In fact, I think Meghan made it worse. Has mental health gotten any better? No. Harry's turned it into a joke. Has online safety or the internet have improved as a result of their advocacy and pushing for regulation and policy? No. All it's done is silence people and shut down voices that equally should be heard. I mean, I could go on and on about why this couple is not a good example of what we need in this society to so-called build back better. I almost wish that we could issue a gag order on these two so they can just shut up, because they are affecting so many people's mental health in such a negative way because of their lies and manipulations and what they have been doing in exploiting people who are vulnerable. Like, these two don't get it. Or maybe they do get it and don't care, which I think is the latter. Anyhow, I think this is a good place to stop. I don't want to continue on in ranting about how toxic these two are for society and why parents need to keep their children away from them. We're all in this fight together, and these two need to be exposed for what they are. I don't want them interfering with our government. That's the biggest issue that I have with Harry and Meghan. And although there's still so many people that don't take them seriously as having any influence, which they don't have at this moment, doesn't mean that they're not going to continue to keep trying. Well, at least this narcissistic sociopath will continue to do whatever she can to undermine and sabotage William and Catherine. The jealousy and envy is real. Anyhow, what do you guys think? Definitely leave your thoughts below. As always, I will be back with more content, but until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye!
It was such a fraud.